Hello and welcome to the Wonkette Weekend Live Chat. I am Robin Panacchia, and this is the lovely and talented Stephen Robinson.
Hi, Robin. How are you?
I am swell. I'd be even sweller if everyone could like, share, and subscribe. But bump.
You did that very well.
I did.
Uh,
I finally got it in like a smooth way. Um, I'm actually currently recovering from the hideous embarrassment of realizing that my window was open after definitely singing Celine Dion for like a full 10 minutes. Um,
uh,
like, my neighbors are very aware that it is, in fact, all coming back to me now.
Great. Well,
So,
to hop right into things while my wife is still listening. So this week has been sort of a lot of focus on the horrible actions of one senator in particular, and I don't mean Bob Menendez, but John Fetterman, who his shabby chic is not being well received. And this is just sort of so revealing. I'd written about this last week. It's so revealing of, and I wouldn't say Republican. I think it's more of just sort of an institutionalist viewpoint, sort of a conservative, but a lot of Democrats who are institutionalists follow this as well, which is just that unless everyone is forced to do something, chaos will occur. So you have like the rule is not that everyone now must wear hoodies. It's just that like we're not going to waste time enforcing or policing what a particular person wears or chooses to wear, and you can still wear suits. And I've seen it argued, like if you don't like your senator to wear hoodies, then you could actually not vote for that person again. I mean, there are many things you can do, but generally speaking, it's just the one. It doesn't mean like uh Joe Manchin going to Fetterman and saying, I'm fighting this, I have to fight decorum. And it's like, dude, like a couple years ago, you were almost all killed. And it wasn't just because someone was wearing a hoodie, it's because,
yeah.
some of your sharply dressed, because, look, Josh Hawley, hence, well dressed man, is a complete, you know, jerk who tried to help overthrow the government and stirred up a mob. That's more the problem. But it became like this whole thing of like how you dress represents who you are as a person, which is such a absurd classism that no one can accept. Like they say it with a straight face, right, Robin? They're like,
Well, they love the idea of superficial decorum. And clearly dressing in suits and whatever they expect women to wear, which is, by the way, like 85,000 times more annoying than having to wear a suit, because men can just wear the same suit every day, and no one's gonna freaking notice. But uh it's it clearly did not work out that way. Like, that did not make people behave better. It didn't do anything. So it doesn't really have the effect that people imagine that it does.
but there's no, just looking at this. So the idea of a world, and had existed, is that when for a job interview, you dressed as you are now,
Mhm.
perfectly charming, same resume, same experience level, I would say, I'm not going to hire Robin. I'm going to hire this other person, even perhaps not as good experience level because of how she dresses. And oh my goodness, like I'm going to get someone who's not as good. Like clearly, like
Mhm.
it's just overtly superficial. Now,
It's
yes, you can
basically
choose.
saying
They
that,
can
like,
do.
yes, you can absolutely judge people based on how they are dressed.
Yes. And I
Uh,
mean, you can choose. You can't choose your, I guess, skin color, weight, though people do have issues with weight and a lot of issues that they are talking about are all wrapped up in that. And so the idea is that you put this uniform on and you are agreeing
mhm.
to fit the sort of rules and standards. And that's like with private clubs. I just finished actually watching an X-Files while I was at the gym, which is the one where they go to the planned community where
Oh,
everyone
I
has
love
the
that one.
crazy.
Yes.
It's very good satire. I've actually written previously for Prime Timer about how these
Mhm.
off the often the Monster of the Week episodes had a lot of really trenchant satire, social satire. So here it's like how everyone must fit and fit into how things are, And I get that. And I get that's why private clubs have dress codes. And I get that's why someone at New York Post had someone, because that's a use of their
Oh
time,
god, that yeah.
wear a dress like Fetterman and try to get into these fancy New York establishments. But again, that's all superficial. We get like how private clubs work and all of that. But the idea that that has anything to do, I, like the idea that you're now agreeing with me, like certain Democrats and others are agreeing with me when I've said that the Senate has been about this private exclusive
Mhm.
club more so than about actually doing the people's business or whatever. And
I
now
mean,
it's like, oh no, that's all it is. It's like just a private club. That's not what that's not it is. It has nothing to do with the quality of your work.
and this is the thing, we do put so many barriers up um to, being the people's representative in terms of how much money that you have to start out. Like, it does make it very difficult. It's like, it says, hey, you have to, be this level of, of successful in your life before you run for office, which is, not great. It's part of the reason why I do really love Cori Bush, because she's just, and, AOC. It's like there are people who are like, we were normal people who had normal jobs,
Mhm.
which I like, a hell of a lot better than people, who just got to be fancy forever.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Republicans sort of co-opted the sort of career politician smear, and Democrats are very resentful of that and say, no, 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 government. I get the importance of government, but at the same
Mhm.
time, yes, representatives who understand what normal people, and I use this example a lot. Elise Stefanik is evil, but she was someone who was still going to a grocery store and was
Yeah.
able to see, like, oh, wait, the price of eggs have gone up. This has gone up. I bet this is an issue to push. Whereas a lot of Democratic leadership was like, what? I mean, look at these macro numbers for inflation and whatever. We're fine. And then they got hit because they didn't have actually anyone sort of like in the real world to tell
Mhm.
them, I think this is how voters are, and we can kind of push this issue, and that's important. Um, yeah, I mean, look, I get Republicans are going to be Republicans about this and terrible, but there's unfortunately some folks in the Democratic Party who, I mean, they resent Fetterman for their own reasons. I get, you don't have to like politicians, but I they want to project their own sort of issues upon him. So one is that he's a fraud. He's like he comes from money. He went to an Ivy League school, and he should be one of them. He should be one. He should want to dress like Alex P. Keaton,
Yeah.
all of that, but he doesn't. The reason he doesn't is it's all part of a fraud. Like he's presenting as a poor person, quote unquote, as a fraud. And I guess all those tattoos, he really went method. That's a lot of effort. Um, and it just sort of reinforced an idea that, well, even if you come from money, maybe that's what is comfortable for you.
Yeah.
But
Well, I mean, the man is 6'8". I'm 5'8", and I realize I'm a woman, but I have trouble finding pants that are long enough.
mhm,
I have a 36-inch inseam, which I think is probably like a lot of what a lot of guys who are 6'8" might have. Like I have a weirdly long inseam. Um, it is harder to buy clothes when you're tall, especially if you're bigger like he is.
mhm,
Because a lot of the time, a lot of the clothes that are, for very tall people are also for very lean people, because the assumption is like, tall and skinny. Um, he is a very, like, I can, as someone who used to dress people for a living, and yes, I dress women, not men, but I can look at him and see like that is a difficult person to dress. That is a person who needs a lot of tailoring. He's much bigger on the top than he is on the bottom. It's like going to be really expensive for him to, buy clothes that um are, suitable for business thing, buy suits and everything like that. And also they're never gonna, the thing that kind of sucks is that we do very much freeze people who have different body types out of fashion in general. And it is very difficult to not look like, a little not as put together in some of those, in suits and everything if you are bigger like that.
Oh yeah,
That's especially true of women.
and that would have been the clear
Yeah.
Republican. The Republicans are kind of waiting. Maybe they're frustrated because they were waiting for him as soon as he got a tailor, because Taylor
Mhm.
reads a certain way, right? So once he has his own tailor for his clothing, and he's obviously going to be starting to spend more
Mhm.
money on actually to dress
You can't
like more like Josh Hawley, right? Even the attempt, Republicans would have been bashing him as wasting all this money. And oh, he's not one of the common people. He's wasting all this money to sort of
you
look like
literally
the nines.
can't buy clothes made for a person like that that are not tailored. They do not come in ready to wear.
Oh
Even
no.
like the big and tall stores are not. It's why like you don't actually see basketball players who haven't like really made it so far in suits a lot.
Yeah.
They're
It's
just going up because it's very hard for people who, of different sizes. And I think especially as far as Fetterman is concerned, where I do feel it's a big everyone just shut your mouth moment is the fact that he had a stroke. Um, you know, like I said, fashion keeps out a lot of body types. It also keeps out a lot of bodies that are not perfectly able. That's why adaptive clothing exists. And frankly, there are not enough options for that. Um, like there aren't enough options for pants that are comfortable for people who are in wheelchairs. There aren't, as many options for people who have strokes. There are a bajillion reasons why it actually is more difficult to dress yourself after you've had a stroke. And yes, he may have preferred casual clothing before, but I feel like this was actually such a good move on the part of Schumer and the senators that they made it a universal thing rather than singling him out and being like, well, he has this particular problem with getting dressed in the morning because he's already been attacked um, so harshly for having had a stroke.
yeah.
Like, and they're like, oh, he shouldn't be in office. And no, it doesn't necessarily affect your brain. Needing to use adaptive technology as he doesn't is not a sign of incompetence. I
Yeah.
mean,
And the
Stephen
ties and
Hawking needed to use adaptive technology.
the
Um,
ties and the buttons and all of that would be
well, I mean, that could be fine motor skills. Also, like, I'm just going to read this because I think it, really made me realize like how many possible issues there are. And it says after your stroke, you could also have some of these issues. Perceptual deficit. You may have limited awareness and attention on the affected side of the body. You could have figure ground discrimination issues, which means that you could have trouble seeing an object because it blends into the background. Also, you could have difficulty with right left discrimination or problems determining right from left. Um, Apraxia, this is the lack of ability to plan out your movements, even though you have the range of motion coordination and strength to do so. You could have an issue during dressing where it is hard to plan or start the task. Perseveration, I'm not pronouncing that correctly, I'm sure. Perseveration, I don't know. This is trouble with moving from one concept or idea to the next. This could make it harder for you to go from one task to another. For example, you may have trouble going from buttoning your shirt to tucking it in. And, fatigue, you may just get tired while getting dressed. And I didn't necessarily realize that there were all of those issues. Like I immediately
hmm.
thought fine motor skills because I actually have dressed people who have had strokes before. Um, like
Well, yeah.
physically dress them. Like um
It's not a
and
surprise that Manchin or Chris Coons, who had joined uh, Susan Collins and the stunt of, well, I'm going to show up in shorts type of thing, that Democrats like that would not back Fetterman because that's, as you said, that's the easiest thing to do is to say these are potentially accommodations, or also it doesn't matter. I mean, to the
he
extent
could
that people
actually
are
just be
saying,
more aware. And he has said like this week that he wasn't aware of, the kind of accommodations that people need once they have an issue like this. And he
"Hmm,
wanted to, pay more attention in general to making to accessibility in the Senate and elsewhere. which is extremely important because we need people to be able to participate in our society. And he could just now be aware that, hey, this is something that could actually keep people who are qualified and, out of the Senate because they don't know, they don't have the ability to do that, which I think
Mhm.
is also a fair point. I also, want to, there's the inherent classism in dress codes in general. And then there's also a lot of racism in dress codes in general. Like not
Yeah.
necessarily the Senate, but, for a long time, um, curly hair was considered unprofessional.
Yeah, I had mentioned that, and then someone had disagreed with me. I think they were flattering me by um, not realizing how exactly old I am. So I was
Yeah.
working at a place in the mid '90s where, yes, the dress code released. Um, it was a major firm in New York, was curly hair bad. And now people are like, no, there's no way. It's like, oh, yes, because someone fought that battle. I mean, the classist stuff is clear of how it's coded. So with both with Fetterman, it's the idea that he's dressing like a bum, whereas the idea just that clothing itself means you don't care about your job, or that you, as opposed to just maybe not wanting to waste time worrying about your clothing and rather just do your job. But it doesn't, the Senate's is hallowed space. And if you wear something that's not a suit, as if there was some sort of magical ceremonial aspect to the suit, it's all absurd. um and then, of course, I was getting at earlier, the folks who were upset with Fetterman were saying, oh, he's only able, and I saw this from a lot of Kamala Harris supporters, that he's only able to do this because he's a white male. He's able to use this. And my sense would be like, okay, well, to the extent that that's true, isn't the whole point is that men, white cis men should use their privilege to help? If he's saying like, if he supports doing this only for himself and not for
Yeah.
women, but he's not, so it's like, okay, well, let's kick open the door. The example I saw was that someone had said, like, back in when Harris had joined the Senate, she was forced to enter through a different way because she was wearing Converse sneakers or
Which
something,
is absolute bullshit.
which is absurd.
You know,
And then she could not make an issue of it. And to the extent of, one, maybe she could have. I find it often sometimes, and I know I'm going to get in trouble for this. The idea is that from here, and someone for record in California as a prosecutor, the idea is like, I get why she might have had to make choices she did. Sometimes taking a more cautious choice doesn't make you a hero. It just makes it more cautious. Doesn't mean I can understand why you didn't pick a certain battle. And yes, I mean, Mitch McConnell was running the Senate then, so there'd been no relief. But yes, you should make the case of like, why do I need to wear these shoes? They're completely
well,
uncomfortable. They make no sense,
no.
and I'm doing my job. Like,
Well,
make
dressy
the
shoes
argument.
for women are not that comfortable for the most part and can in fact screw up your feet. Now, granted, I've got a whole like closet full of Jeffrey Campbells, but my shoes are ridiculous, but I'm not wearing them every single day. And that actually could present a difficulty for someone who has mobility issues. People should absolutely be like women should absolutely be able to wear sneakers or more comfortable shoes anywhere. Um, the fact that heels are considered dressy, flats are considered not dressy. Not everyone can walk in heels. Quite frankly, as much as I do technically walk in heels, I can't walk in heels. That's why I have really jacked up ankles. Um, but there are like we had a girl at the store that I worked at who had plantar fasciitis and could not wear dressy shoes, which was the dress code at the time. And so she had to have an exception. And so we couldn't have that rule anymore. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing to like, make things more accessible for people and pay attention to things that you may not necessarily realize. I think it's kind of bananas that we'll have like 3-day conversations on Twitter about whether or not small talk is ableist and then be like, very much fine with very ableist clothing, like actually ableist clothing restrictions and dress codes, without even, mentioning that, like, hey, maybe not everyone can wear these things.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. To look good in a suit generally means a certain silhouette. I mean, they're not designed. It's not designed to be equal opportunity, similar with a lot of clothing for women and whatever. And but yeah, the idea that just what you're wearing is an implication of how serious you take your job. It's just
yeah.
absurd. It's never been proven. People lose good employees. I mean, especially when they keep talking about Fetterman being dressed like a bum. It's like I don't. I mean, I live in the Pacific Northwest. I mean, he either would work in IT, frankly, he would work in certain
Yeah.
executive positions in tech. And one of the big things that
Because
used to
they're
occur.
adapting to the fact that people in that industry don't want to wear
Oh
these
yeah.
suits every day.
Well, I mean, I a former roommate of mine, so this is like almost more than 25 years ago, her boyfriend was a guy who was really quite brilliant in the tech world and was often sought out by like major New York firms and like crazy money they were offering him,
Oh
but he
yeah.
would turn down because he was a guy with tattoos and wanted to like have his different colored hair, and so he would literally would turn down tons of money. And he was being paid handsomely by
Mhm.
certain standards to work somewhere else, but he was like, I don't want to, this is not worth it. Like that, they're putting the price on my expression. I don't want to kind of work in an environment. And it's like it's so stupid. It's like, why would you lose quality employees just because you're
Well,
afraid of how people dress or whatever?
I mean, yeah, that happened to a guy who was super qualified. One of the things that I used to do for a long time and that I would very much like to get back to at some point, provided I can like figure out my way in, is I used to do working wardrobes for women. Because, well, they have them for men too. I'm just obviously more qualified in the area for women. And basically, we do like one of the things that people in you know outreach programs do is they create working wardrobes for impoverished people so that they have clothes to wear to interviews, so that they have clothes to wear to work. And we very much, yes, there's the issue of wanting to, wear more comfortable clothes or, be expressive in some particular way. But there are also issues like where people can't, and having it be the norm that you are supposed to, have a certain amount of like like propriety to your dress is
Mhm.
intimidating. Like that, if someone's like, oh, okay, I can only afford one nice outfit to wear to work,
Now, I mean, also
that's
if you're
that's
from,
difficult.
it's much easier now with the internet, but like there
Yeah.
are people from a world where would they have learned to tie a tie? Like you have to like have the sort of back experience of someone in your family
Yeah.
having the experience knowing what tie work because all the
Knowing how to put those clothes together.
it doesn't end there. People talk about the how easy men's clothing are, and certainly compared to certain to
Mhm.
women's clothing, but amongst the people who care about those things, it is very easy. Fetterman would have been the first. He was still would have been called someone who looked like a bum because his suits, most likely, unless he got them really professionally tailored, would not have looked as good on him as whatever. And he maybe would have been wearing the wrong tie or something. That's the whole thing with dress codes. They're all about finding ways to say this person is lesser than another person. I mean, that's how all there's no logic. And we're talking about people in the Senate, especially Republicans, who refused to wear masks, which had a
Mhm.
clear public health benefit. And they complained about wearing masks on the House floor.
That's a
But
super
they're
good point.
and now there's all of like, oh my God, someone is wearing a hoodie, which oh my the Senate is now falling apart. And you know, fashion changes. If you think about even when senators were wearing, they talk about sort of the glory days of the 50s, which weren't that glorified days. But, when people were wearing suits to the Senate, they were also wearing suits to like baseball games or whatever, right? So a
Mhm.
lot of it wasn't necessarily this huge step up in form. They weren't wearing frock coats or
Mhm.
evening wear or whatever. It was about like what men wore when going outside, and that's changed. So yes, people but it's interesting. I mean, Susan Collins sort of deliberately equating casual wear
Mhm.
with wearing a bikini, which she would not have, which, most people do not wear to go grocery shopping, for instance, as opposed to, is very deliberate, similar to like when people attacked Lauren Bobart, who I loathe, but we'll talk about her outfit she wore to see Beetlejuice as being slutty, which is to equate some sort of sexuality to just how a woman is dressed, which doesn't
Mhm.
mean any. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can
Yeah.
actually be slutty if you're going to judge your sexual, but
In
dress
literally
any
any
way you
outfit
think.
you could possibly own.
Yes. So just because you want to have
Like,
show off
behavior
your
does
girls.
not. Yeah.
Um,
Also, by the way, I would not, necessarily for that, but it is actually extremely hard for women who are bigger on top to dress and to look up, quote unquote appropriate. It's very difficult because, they don't have the options of wearing button down blouses a lot of the time.
mhm.
Or, also having that tailored look. It becomes, that's actually, been an issue for a long time for, in women's fashion. The other thing that I would like to point out is that, like, yes, a man, I did say, like, a man can buy like a couple suits and be fine. Women are expected largely to have like a different outfit every day. And that is very expensive. And one way I think of, kind of, inadvertently freezing, women who don't have that much money out of the workforce. Um, it's not,
It's just
there
sort
are a
of
lot of downsides
absurd.
to it.
It's sort of absurd, and Fetterman, of course, while wearing a hoodie, I think demonstrated a little bit more
True.
leadership skills than Chuck Schumer in a suit and tie when Fetterman was the first senator to call for Bob Menendez's resignation because Menendez was recently indicted for so many comically absurd um, corruption charges, and I don't understand what's happening. Like, why is it so difficult? I mean, Dick Durbin today said that, um, he's innocent until proven guilty, until he's convicted. And I think that's fine for like him
Mm.
going to prison, but that's no reason he needs to remain in the Senate.
Yeah, no.
Like, they found lots of, there's photos of lots of cash in, you know, his clothing that has his name on it. And, yes, let a jury decide, but maybe he shouldn't be in the Senate anymore. Um, and he was in trouble before and got off and kind of kept criming still. I guess that's kind of impressive that he just couldn't give
My
up.
favorite thing, I'm gonna say, is in the comments, because, like, ironically, Fetterman was the first person to call for Menendez to step down, and in the comments, there were all these Republican commenters who either A, did not know, like, just assumed that because he had been, there were credible allegations and charges against him, that he must have been one of theirs, or were just really in favor of corruption in government to begin with. We're all like, he should resign first, and like basically saying like innocent until proven guilty, and like very much standing for Bob Menendez. Oh, my other theory is that, because of, it had to do with gold bars, and you know how those people are about their gold.
Yeah, they assumed.
Yeah.
Stephen Miller, one of the worst humans who ever existed, had said that obviously Fetterman did not write that tweet himself, and it's clear that the timing is all coordinated to force Mendez off the Foreign Service, some sort of grand conspiracy. And you're reading this, and it's like, well, Stephen Miller is evil. I get that, but he's also now like completely conspiracy theorist, lunatic.
Hmm.
But it's this whole thing of like Fetterman is not mentally disabled. He's able to put a very like it's a 4-line tweet saying Menendez should not be in the Senate, and the idea that he is just somehow permanently disabled from a stroke is one of those things that's so grotesque and insulting, but Republicans can kind of openly promote this idea. Well, human beings do have strokes and they're able to go about their
Yeah.
lives afterward and recover with some accommodations, depending on severity of the attack. But the people who like will say that somehow it's a fraud and like there's fake Fettermans, like the whole
Oh,
Paul
it's
is dead
clones.
thing.
There are so many clones of him.
Um, yes, it's very easy to find. I think
Like,
he shared that of like someone looking if you're also 6'8" and wherever.
please, it is not that easy to find a man who is 6'8". I'm kidding.
That was sort of his thing. It's so easy to find someone who looks just like me, to be my
Have you?
clone
I have never seen
doppelganger.
anyone in person who looks like John Fetterman. Like,
If it was that easy, you would have found like sort of a more. You could have found a different Dianne Feinstein or something as
yeah,
well. Like we would have
exactly.
gotten a better. We would have been better at our conspiracies, but alas. Um, that's a very good question.
Oh, Phyllis Schlafly is literally the answer to that. It was very much on the way to being ratified, and Phyllis Schlafly went on tour being like, you know, what would be super great would be if women actually stayed home and did not work. We don't have the ERA, especially now, because there's like an extreme backlash against feminism from the right. That is why,
Yeah,
because they
that's
do
always
not
been
like the idea of an equal rights amendment.
well, yeah. The straw feminist character Ainsley Hayes on The West Wing was the one who argued against Rob Lowe's straw man liberal about it because he was like, "How could you, as a woman, oppose the ERA?" And she was like, "I don't need extra laws. I'm a conservative, and the Constitution defends me already," which is fundamentally untrue. But yeah, everyone applauded, and she made her great straw man conservative point. No, generally speaking, it's just that yeah, as you said, Shafley and others wants to keep women as second class citizens, usually dependent upon men, because in a capitalist society, money is sort of important.
Yeah.
And if you do not have the means to make your own money, um, even if you have the wealthiest husband in the world, if you live in and they also try to get rid of no fault divorce. So
Mhm.
essentially,
Oh
it's not
yeah.
like you're going to have any means to survive without them. And then your husband, you turn 50 and your husband like ditches you. So yeah.
Like that's been like a huge thing for a hot minute. I don't know if you saw Rebecca Tracer's article in the Cut this week about how there's been like a recent push on the right for marriage, and they're like all of a sudden like obsessed with marriage and getting people to get married. And I do think like a huge part of that, quite frankly, is about like controlling the women, and they'll say it openly. Like they will say women who get married and have kids are more likely to be conservative, so we want women to get married and have kids. Like that
Yeah.
is also, personally, I think it's incel logic, which has very much infiltrated the right. With and it's the idea that there is not an equal distribution of women, and that's
Um,
been a thing for them for a while. Like they don't want an equal distribution of wealth, but they do want equal distribution of women.
isn't it also sort of faulty logic? So I don't think you're like they're assuming that as soon as a woman gets married, her brain shuts off or something, as opposed to
Yeah.
could be many reasons for that discrepancy, but they see it as in their favor. So they like, oh well, as long as women are uneducated and married, everything's going to be wonderful for us, married with kids and all of that. So I don't, I mean, yeah, I mean, culturally, I mean, it goes, I mean, yes, people can sometimes become more conservative or more likely, as I like to say, um, rationalize their own sort of selfishness if it's through the extent of their own kids. So it's kind of like,
Mm.
oh, well, I used to support public schools, but no, I need to make sure my kid goes to the best school, and that's why they're
Yeah,
going to private school. I've had that discussion with a friend of mine, or like, oh yeah, I'm not against living in a neighborhood with
yeah,
minorities, but oh my, I can't have my kid get killed, and now
yeah.
I'm going to
And of
move
course,
to this
I
gated
mean,
community.
NIMBYism in general.
Yes, everything is sort of better when you can rationalize it as being your selfishness being in result for other people. Uh, but Bob Menendez did get a primary challenge. So I don't know. I hope Schumer is able to act as a leader. I'm being completely naive and silly here, but that they can somehow get him out before he's going to be completely embarrassing to have Menendez
Yeah.
continuing to serve in the Senate until I mean a full year, right? More than a year. So it's like he should not be. He's a
It's
completely
not a
corrupt
good, it's
person.
not the best look.
He's quite corrupt, and yeah, I mean,
This is the thing that diminishes, we're out here trying to be like, hey, Clarence Thomas needs to go. But, we're just going to let this guy hang around until
yeah,
whenever.
my yeah, the brother was there. Clarence Thomas was not a cheap date. He did not no cash or whatever. Like someone bought his kids. Like he's very clear on how his corruption goes. Though it did turn out, and we Gary at Wonkette had covered this of like how Thomas did seems to have changed his mind on an issue, and he's notoriously does not change his mind. But he did change his mind on one issue that that did benefit one of his sugar daddies, and that is sort of very clear. But you can't prove anything because someone has the right to change their mind, and you can't prove that him saying, "Oh, I said this was constitutional. Now I think it's unconstitutional because I've spent this quality time on a private island eating unicorn with my wealthy friends." There's one photo of Clarence Thomas with some rich asshole, and between them is Ken Burns, who I'm surprised kind of is in that circle. I guess he is. I just feel like if you're socializing, it's already bad, but if like Clarence Thomas is there, it's like, what are you doing with your life? I don't know.
Yeah, you just have to start like questioning things. If you're at a party and Clarence Thomas shows up, you probably want to leave that party, I would say. Like something bad is, something sketchy is going to happen. I mean, not necessarily like I'm not saying it's going to be like a key party or something. I know what key parties are, by the way. I saw the ice storm. No, someone was like, "Oh, you wouldn't know what key parties are" recently, and I was like, "I absolutely do. I saw the ice storm." Um,
uh,
um,
Let me ask you about something you'd wrote about yesterday. So we do not actually need businesses that won't pay their employees enough to live, because that's been an
yeah, I
issue
went
both of
busy on
us.
that one this weekend.
That that's something that has really frustrated us. So yeah, I mean, but yeah, you wrote about this Saturday. But could you just for
Yeah,
those who might not have
absolutely.
seen that?
So, a few things that people have been saying in light of the UAW strikes and the writers strikes have very much like they've hit a nerve with me because of the fact that like I do think that these people have genuine sort of like compassion for business in this very weird and opposite way. And you can see so much of it, especially this week on the internet. And, I do think that's partly because there have been like 40 plus years prior, like, to like the first, like when unions started being cool again. Like about 40 plus years of like straight up anti-union propaganda, like these people are taking advantage of our job creators and that's destroying our economy and everything. And here's the thing, we do not actually need businesses to exist that do not pay people enough to live, because that actually destroys our entire society. And it's not just like, oh, those people can't afford to eat. It means that those people can't afford to buy things from other businesses. It means it has far reaching effects. And, you know, we should not be, like, I'm all in favor of social programs. But the fact that like social programs have become a way to supplement businesses that don't want to pay their workers enough to live, that's not okay.
Mhm.
Unless we do it in some way directly. I would rather have that be something that is voted on. Like, hey, let's vote to give this the company money so that they can pay their workers a fair wage, which would never actually happen. Like, that's not, like, if we actually put it in that very direct way, people would not vote for that.
Yeah, some of the smaller businesses will often cry poverty and just like, well, I can't afford to give sick time or sick, and then it's like, well, what are
Mhm.
you but what are you offering to this person? Why shouldn't that person just go work at Starbucks to the extent that they can offer certain things that your mom and pop business can't? I support mom and pop businesses, but not if they need slave
Yeah.
labor to survive. I just can't do that. But we are a country that really got used to slave labor and child
Oh, yeah.
labor and
Well, I mean,
whatever.
the big divide in this country from the beginning is, like, quite frankly, I'd like to pay.
Well, yes.
I'd
Well, the idea that you can also a sort of lifestyle that requires slave labor. Like, I'm gonna have this
Mhm.
huge plantation, and all I have to do or balls can only function if there are people working for nothing, and
Yeah.
I don't have to actually do anything because it's very hard to maintain all that like, especially if not even just cost, maybe you might have to work, so they don't really want to do that. um and like sort of things we get used to style inevitably, because I'm a geek and I will often watch architectural digest will have these videos about the construction of classic New York buildings, or
Mhm.
like say the Brooklyn Bridge. And inevitably in the comments or later we read books, people will speak wistfully of how, oh, we built the Brooklyn Bridge so quickly previously, or we built the Empire State Building in no time at all. It's like, okay, a lot of people died, or they were
Yeah.
working around the clock. So even if they didn't die at the time, they were working like 24 hours and then later died at like 50 because that type
Mhm.
of lifestyle is not great. It's not necessarily an engineering feat. It's just that you are working people literally to death and then discard them is not cool. But we are sort of, as a society, Americans just seem to think that that's
Well,
great.
because we've very much, you know, decided that our economy is about creating wealth rather than like taking care of basic needs, which as I mentioned in the piece, is the basic function of any society. The,
Yes.
the beginning of societies in general, like 80 bajillion years ago, was, to figure out how to meet everyone's needs. Hunters and gatherers, like some people would hunt, other people would gather. No one was like, oh, we got to like starve these people because they're not, they're too old to work. Um,
Oh yeah.
that is why everything has been created. And if we focus, and if everything is about, creating wealth for certain people, that is going to create a failure of a society.
Oh yeah.
Things are going to disintegrate.
Well, if you look at major cities in the U.S., so specifically New York, San Francisco, and even some of the smaller ones, Portland, Seattle, um, the focus on what's the definition by many of like a successful economy or a successful style of living in these cities is usually how the top 1% lives in their
Mhm.
homes and their lifestyle. And that's great. And generally speaking, as long as the poor do their part and kind of quietly and non-violently die outside of eyesight, that's great. But then they start to complain when the poor don't do that. Okay, well, now I'm tripping over homeless people
Mhm.
when I'm going to work or when I go into the subway. And it's like, well, no, because you live in a dystopia where all like
Where
there's
people
just
can't
no,
afford to live places.
they can't afford to live, they have other issues that we're
We
not
don't
meeting
take
because
care of
they're
the
being
mentally
used.
ill. We make it impossible to live anywhere. Like, we're basically making it impossible for people to, you know, even exist in a lower, income bracket. Like, we're basically making that impossible to do. There, there are issues in New York and a lot of other cities right now, New York in particular, where like businesses are like, oh, we can't find people to work at our stores because no, we don't want to pay people enough to live in the city of New York. Like, no, they're not paying people enough to work at H&M
Mhm.
or wherever.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
New York, these cities are not, and it's again, it's happening to Seattle, and I've seen it in
mhm.
Seattle and Portland as well. But New York, they're becoming ultimately, I would say, like Venice. It ultimately would be like cities that can't sort of live, can't really be living cities because it's just impossible. If I'm a any number of people, if you're working at a deli in New York, why wouldn't you work at a deli almost anywhere else?
Yeah, where you can
And
like live and make and live sort of more reasonably. That actually did one of my favorite, stories of the pandemic, which is like a weird thing to say, was the fact that the Hamptons basically shut down because no one who could do all the things that they needed people to do could afford to live on like in the Hamptons. Like that wasn't possibly they didn't have people to do their nails or do their hair because no one who does nails or does hair could afford to live there.
mhm,
And if you price people out of society entirely, it's it's not going to end well. Um, oh, here, just I'm gonna answer a question. It says je ne sais quoi. Um, I don't think anyone saw that because I'm not you know like sitting like this, but yeah, this is an example of like weird classism because this shirt was originally $98. So like it is a t-shirt. It is weirdly expensive, or it was before I got it at Marshall's. Um,
yeah, I mean that had reminded me. I'd written about this before, like Kristen Cinema, Susan Collins had actually defended Kristen Cinema when a New
mm,
York Times author, writer who was a black woman had written a piece, dared just even talking about her fashion sense that was deemed sexist and horrible. And I think what this the author had gotten into was the idea that Cinema's clothing, while bizarre by many
yeah,
standards, reads as wealthy. So it does not read as, it reads as wealthy. It's often well fitting. Even her like Clave Canada Clave Bear outfit that she wore to uh some event, and then her Aaron Neville cosplay. These things are just expensive.
leave Aaron Neville alone. Sorry.
So yeah, it's all about what reads as
Yeah. Well, because most
well.
of her clothes. So here's the thing. Here's a little known secret about high end retail. One of the things that we do when people come into the store, or did, I don't work in it anymore, is you look at their shoes and you look at their purse, and it's called a purse scan, shoe scan, because which shoes are expensive, which purses are expensive. I can look at most of Kirsten Cinema's outfits and be like, that is an expensive outfit, even if it looks like clowny. The yellow dress that she wore to the State of the Union that everyone was making fun of, that's like from Anthropology. I think it was like about like 200-300. And that's not crazy expensive. It's like, standard, fairly standard, ready to wear, um, like in the, upper market. But people can see that and be like, oh, she has wealth. She is, spending her money on, like, it looks crazy, but it's eccentric. It's not inappropriate because it costs money. And that is, where there are issues, obviously. That I have to say, I again, I don't know that much about men's fashions, but most of Fetterman's clothes do not like read to me as casual but crazy pants expensive.
Yeah, he just normal clothing, but itself again not dressing like a bum because there are normal clothing that he paid for and put on. But yeah, I mean it's all very coded with wealth and such to be a sense of what is acceptable in the country club. The Senate, I found, for as useless as it often is, just really seems to think that the country club mentality is more important than actually doing anything. So
Yeah.
kind of that how you get Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court, because Joe Biden had agreed to an appropriate confirmation with Danforth Quayle, the Republican, um, in the Senate gym or something. They made a hand, and it was not acceptable. So I think none of this benefits anyone.
No, not so much. Well, it doesn't benefit anyone who's not rich and also doesn't know, um, like how to behave among, not necessarily behave, but like all of like the shorthands and like the things that are, what you're supposed to telegraph, in terms of wealth that makes people seem acceptable to other people who have wealth. It's fucking weird, okay? Like there's a lot of, intricate things that people don't necessarily realize telegraph wealth to other people who have wealth. And that puts people who, who are not raised in that, who are not, well versed in that at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
Um,
And I do want to clarify because Robin was on this beat for a while after Alexandra Ocasio Cortez was elected, was that even when she attempted to meet the standards of the dress code, there was relentless articles
oh yeah.
about how she was a fraud and was spending all this money. I think you said like they expected her to show up in a barrel with the straps on it or something.
Yeah.
Um, but it was like, yeah, like, and well, what is she saying that she still has student loan debt when she has to? Well, yes, a lot of people. That's the they have to buy. They have to invest in absurd, this absurd dress code as opposed to paying down debt because otherwise they wouldn't get the job. So, yes, I don't
Also,
think.
those people are clearly not Maxinistas. and,
Yeah,
but, no, there is, people want to make it so difficult to just like get dressed and do your job because, they want to have all of these, rules for everyone that some, in order to make it so that you're always doing something wrong.
yes, but also you can enjoy it because if you enjoy dressing up too well, then you're a dandy, you're gay or
Yeah.
something, and like that's so. I mean, if you enjoy being in the height of fashion, by all means do that. Or if you, or however that's defined. If you don't. But the idea that literally the quality of your work is dependent upon that, I think is just absurd. I mean, I'm all for obviously hygiene. I think you should
Yeah.
bathe, but because that affects other people. But like what you're wearing, I think it's not necessarily when they call it a hoodie distraction, like somehow it's
Yeah.
distracting to see him. What's distracting is to be in the same Senate with, an asshole like Ted Cruz, who, has his rubbish beard still. So I don't get sort of the very, uh, very selective enforcement of any sort of norms or standards of dress and appearance. So
Mhm. No, it is. One of the things I was talking about this week is that, I my super bougie thing that I do that I, again, I do not feel is bougie for me, is that I love the opera and I go to the opera as often as I can and am able to. And what I do like is the way that you see people who are, it's like half of the people are super dressed up. And I am one of those people because there are, honestly, part of the reason I like going to the opera, other than the fact that I like it, is like there are so many clothes I have that I have literally no place else to wear. um, but there are people who are super dressed up, and then there are people who are like, not dressed entirely, unlike John Fetterman. And people are just there because they really like enjoy that music. And, I'm so glad that they're enjoying it regardless of how they're dressed. And I think that that's something that we lose when we focus on decorum and we focus on, high versus low art behavior, anything like opera was originally low art. Um, Shakespeare was originally low art. Um, a lot of, things that we consider fancy were at one point, for the people. And the fact that we sort of, I feel like we do ourselves a huge disservice in general by saying like certain types of dress are acceptable for enjoying things, for working certain places, and other things are not appropriate. Like, A, because, who decided that, and B, why keep people out from enjoying or working at a thing that they are good at or enjoy?
Yeah, I mean, and folks, in the theater worlds particularly, they will complain that no one's going to theater, then while also saying like no one dresses up for the theater anymore, and it's just like, well, maybe that's not a good time for them. Like, so I don't know. What
Maybe
do you
they just
want?
want
Do
to
you want
enjoy
people to,
things. Like,
if you want them to come and enjoy your show, does it really matter? Like, I mean, being rude to others, so having sex in the theater, or like being loud or distracting. But even being loud, like some things are like everything is judgmental on that, right? Like some
mhm.
people don't want anyone to sing. It's like, I only want to hear this person sing. Where it's like, okay, well, some people do like to sing along. Some people, I mean, I've always said the definition of like, if I want if I don't want anyone to make any noise or distract me or do anything, I can just watch this alone or listen
Yeah.
to the album alone in my home. If I go out into the world, other people exist in the world.
Well,
So
because I think
part
the
of it.
point of going to the theater, going to a show, is also just like being around other people who also love that thing. And
Yeah.
that's like just a very cool experience.
I know someone had mentioned once, like, they stopped going to movies because people were coughing or doing this or laughing. It's like, people exist. Okay, well then don't stay at home. But like, if you go out, people exist. That
Yeah.
tips over to a point of being, I like to be considerate of others, but yes, they don't needs to be in a
You
ridiculous
know,
level.
with that, I actually always very much go back to there's this Fran Lebowitz essay that I just love madly. And it is quite outdated. It's called When Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, Shut Them. And it's basically just like her big rant on n- not no longer being able to smoke in airport baggage claims. And like that, well, but the end point of it was, when I am at home, I get to do what I want. I may hate these people, but like when I am in public, they have run of the place. There are lots of things that personally annoy me, but I'm not bothering them about it. Um, and I think that that's just like a very like good and sane attitude to have. I'm generally not bothered by things that other people do unless they are actively hurting someone.
Mhm. No, I would agree. That seems a good note on which to thank you everyone for joining us for our favorite stories from the pandemic with Robin Panacchia and Steve Robbins. We just started hosting those each week. Favorite stories from the pandemic. Um,
Oh, geez. All right. Like, share, and subscribe, and we will see you guys next week.
hey, take care.
Bye.